I was rummaging through our shared laptop, searching for the tax documents I needed for the accountant, when I stumbled upon a hidden folder buried deep within the directories. Curiosity piqued. I clicked on it, and my world shattered. There, in high definition, were photos of my wife, Jessica, in the arms of another man. Explicit, undeniable, and soul-crushing. My heart raced, my vision blurred, and a cold sweat broke out as the realization of her betrayal hit me like a freight train. Jessica and I had been married for 10 years, and in all that time I never once doubted her fidelity. We had our ups and downs, like any couple, but I always believed we could weather any storm. Now, staring at the damning evidence before me, I felt the ground beneath me give way. My hands shook as I scrolled through the images, each one more painful than the last. There was no mistaking the passion in her eyes, the intimacy in their embrace. This wasn't just a fling, it was an affair. I sat back in my chair trying to steady my breathing. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, anger, hurt, confusion, and a deep aching sense of loss. How could she do this to me? To us? I thought about our children, about the life we had built together. It was all a lie. Every loving gesture, every shared moment, now tainted by her deceit. I knew I had to confront her, but the thought of seeing her, of hearing her voice, made my stomach churn. I needed time to process this, to figure out my next move. But time wasn't on my side. She would be home soon, and I couldn't just sit here, wallowing in my misery. The front door creaked open, and I heard Jessica's cheerful voice calling out to me. My heart pounded in my chest as I quickly closed the laptop and tried to compose myself. She walked into the living room, a bright smile on her face, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. "Hey, honey, how was your day?" she asked, leaning in to kiss me. I pulled away, unable to bear her touch. "We need to talk," I said, my voice cold and distant. Jessica's smile faltered, replaced by a look of concern. "What's wrong, John?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. "I found something today, something you've been hiding from me." Her eyes widened in alarm, and she glanced at the laptop. "What do you mean?" I stood up, unable to stay still any longer. "I found the photos, Jessica, the ones of you and Daniel." Her face turned pale, and she took a step back, shaking her head. "John, I can explain." "Explain what?" I snapped, my anger finally breaking through. "Explain how you've been lying to me, how you've been sneaking around behind my back with him." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she whispered. "I never meant to hurt you." "But you did," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "You shattered everything we had. Why, Jessica? Why him?" She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. "I don't know, John. I was lonely and he was there. It just happened." I turned away, unable to look at her any longer. Her excuses were meaningless, her tears empty. The woman I thought I knew was gone, replaced by a stranger. And in that moment, I made a decision. I would not let her betrayal destroy me. I would take back control, and I would make them both pay for what they had done. "Get out," I said quietly, my back still turned to her. "What?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Get out of this house. I can't stand to look at you right now." Jessica hesitated, but the steel in my voice left no room for argument. She grabbed her purse and fled, leaving me alone with my shattered heart and a burning desire for revenge. As the door closed behind her, I sank to the floor, overwhelmed by the enormity of what had just happened. The woman I loved, the life we had built, all of it was gone. But I wasn't going to let her betrayal define me. I would rise from these ashes, stronger and more determined than ever, and I would make sure she and Daniel felt the full weight of the pain they had inflicted on me. The house was eerily silent after Jessica left. The ticking of the clock on the wall seemed louder than ever, each second a reminder of my shattered world. I sat there on the floor, staring blankly at the spot where she had stood. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, anger, sorrow, confusion, but above all, a deep, aching sense of betrayal. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling like they were made of lead, and made my way to the kitchen. I needed something to steady my nerves, something to dull the pain. I poured myself a generous glass of bourbon and downed it in one gulp, the liquid burning a path down my throat. It didn't help much, but at least it gave me something else to focus on for a moment. As the alcohol began to take effect, a new thought crept into my mind. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe there was some other explanation. I clung to that hope, desperate for any reason to believe that this nightmare wasn't real. I stumbled back to the laptop, my hands shaking as I opened the folder again. The images stared back at me, as clear and damning as before. I forced myself to look at them, to confront the truth, but no matter how many times I scrolled through them, I couldn't find any way to justify what I was seeing. Denial gave way to anger, a white-hot rage that consumed me. How could she do this? After everything we had been through, after everything we had built together, how could she throw it all away? I smashed my fist down on the table, the pain a welcome distraction from the turmoil inside me. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through our text messages, looking for any signs I might have missed. Every "I love you," every sweet message, now felt like a cruel joke. I called my best friend Mike, needing someone to talk to. His voice on the other end was a lifeline. "John, what's up?" he answered, sounding cheerful. "Mike," I said, my voice breaking, "I need to talk to you. It's about Jessica." His tone shifted immediately, concern replacing the cheer. "What happened?" "I found out she's been cheating on me," I blurted out, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. There was a pause, and then, "Jesus, John, are you sure?" "Yeah," I said bitterly. "I found pictures on our laptop. It's real." "Fuck, man," Mike said, his voice filled with sympathy. "Do you need me to come over?" "No," I replied, my anger subsiding slightly in the face of his concern. "I just needed to tell someone. I can't be alone with this." "Listen, I'm here for you," he said firmly. "Whatever you need, just say the word." "Thanks, Mike," I said, feeling a small measure of comfort. "I'll be okay. I just needed to hear a friendly voice." We talked for a while longer, Mike doing his best to offer support. When I finally hung up, I felt a little better, but the pain and anger were still there, simmering beneath the surface. I knew I needed to confront Jessica again, to get answers to the questions swirling in my mind, but I wasn't sure if I was ready for that conversation yet. I spent the rest of the evening in a daze, the hours blending together as I tried to process everything. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those pictures and felt that gut-wrenching pain all over again. By the time the sun started to rise, I knew what I had to do. I needed answers, and I needed to figure out my next move. There was no going back to the way things were, but I couldn't move forward without understanding why this had happened. When Jessica returned later that morning, her eyes were red and swollen from crying. She looked at me, her expression a mix of guilt and desperation. "John, can we talk?" she asked quietly. I nodded, feeling a steely resolve settle over me. "We need to talk," I said, my voice cold and firm. "I want to know everything, Jessica. No more lies." She took a deep breath, tears welling up in her eyes again. "I never meant for this to happen," she began, her voice trembling. It just did. I was feeling lonely, and Daniel was there. He listened to me and made me feel special. It started as just talking, but it escalated." Her words cut me deeply, but I forced myself to listen, to let her explain. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. 6 months, she admitted, looking down at the floor. 6 months. Half a year of lies and deceit. The anger flared up again, but I pushed it down. "Why didn't you tell me you were feeling this way? We could have worked through it." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I was scared, John. Scared of losing you. Scared of admitting that something was wrong. And by the time I realized how far it had gone, it was too late. I didn't know how to stop." I stood up, needing to put some distance between us. "Do you love him?" Jessica hesitated, and at that moment I knew the answer. "I don't know," she finally said, her voice breaking. "I thought I did, but now, I don't know." Her uncertainty was like a knife to the heart. "I can't do this," I said, my voice choked with emotion. "I can't be with someone who doesn't know if they love me or someone else." "Please, John," she begged, reaching out to me. "Give me a chance to make this right. I love you, and I want to fix this. I'll do anything." I looked at her, the woman I had once thought I would spend the rest of my life with, and felt a surge of sorrow and anger. "You already broke us, Jessica," I said quietly. "I don't know if we can be fixed." As she stood there sobbing, I turned away. I needed time to think, to figure out what I wanted and how to move forward. I couldn't stay in this house, surrounded by memories of a life that no longer existed. Grabbing my keys, I walked out the door, leaving Jessica behind. As I drove aimlessly through the city, my mind raced. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let this betrayal define me. I would find a way to move on, to heal, and to make sure that both Jessica and Daniel faced the consequences of their actions. The drive did little to calm my raging thoughts. My mind kept replaying the confrontation with Jessica, her tearful confessions, and the revelation that had torn my life apart. I found myself parked outside a coffee shop, the irony of the peaceful setting stark against the chaos inside me. I needed to think, to plan my next steps, but all I could focus on was the image of Jessica with Daniel. Daniel. I vaguely remembered him from a work function, a nondescript face in a crowd of colleagues. Now he was the man who had stolen my wife, the catalyst of my pain. I knew I had to confront him, to see the man who had turned my life upside down. But first I needed to gather more information. I pulled out my phone and searched for Daniel on social media. His profile wasn't hard to find, filled with pictures of him smiling, enjoying life, oblivious to the turmoil he had caused. As I scrolled through his posts, I found photos of him with colleagues, at work events, and one picture in particular that caught my eye. A group photo from a recent company retreat. Jessica was in it, standing next to Daniel, their smiles a painful reminder of the betrayal. I noted down the details of his workplace and decided to pay a visit. I needed to see him, to look him in the eye, and confront the man who had destroyed my marriage. The thought of it filled me with a cold resolve. I drove to the address, a sleek office building in the heart of the city. The receptionist at the front desk greeted me with a polite smile. "How can I help you today?" "I'm here to see Daniel," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, her fingers poised over the keyboard. "No, but it's urgent. I'm a friend," I lied, trying to keep my expression neutral. She hesitated, then picked up the phone and dialed. After a brief conversation, she nodded and directed me to the elevators. "He's on the third floor, room 312. I took a deep breath as I rode the elevator up, my mind racing. I needed to stay calm, to keep my emotions in check. This confrontation wasn't just about venting my anger, it was the first step in my plan for revenge. I found the room easily enough and knocked on the door. A moment later it swung open, and there he was. Daniel looked surprised to see me, his brows furrowing in confusion. "John, right?" he said, recognizing me from the few times we had crossed paths at work events. "What are you doing here?" I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. "We need to talk," I said, my voice cold and determined. He gestured to a chair, but I remained standing. "About what?" he asked, a hint of nervousness creeping into his voice. "About Jessica," I said, watching his reaction closely. Daniel's face paled, and he swallowed hard. "John, I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me," I interrupted, my anger bubbling to the surface. "I know about the affair. I saw the pictures." His shoulders sagged, and he sank into his chair, burying his face in his hands. "I'm sorry," he muttered, his voice muffled. "I never wanted this to happen." "Sorry?" I echoed, my voice rising. "You destroyed my marriage, Daniel. Do you have any idea what you've done?" He looked up, his eyes filled with guilt. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. I didn't plan for it to go this far. Just what?" I demanded. "Just wanted to have some fun? Just wanted to see how far you could push things before they blew up in your face?" "It started as a mistake," he said, his voice shaking. "I never meant to hurt you or Jessica. It just happened." I clenched my fists, struggling to keep my composure. "Well, it happened. And now you're going to face the consequences." "What do you mean?" he asked, a note of fear in his voice. "You'll see," I said, turning on my heel and walking out of the room. "You'll see soon enough." As I left the building, I felt a grim satisfaction. Confronting Daniel was only the beginning. I had a lot of work to do, but I was determined to see my plan through. Jessica and Daniel had betrayed me, and they were going to pay for it. I would make sure of that. Confronting Daniel had given me a grim sense of satisfaction, but it also left me with a clearer purpose. The drive back home felt different now. My mind was no longer consumed by chaotic emotions, but instead focused on a singular goal: revenge. I parked the car in the driveway and sat there for a moment, collecting my thoughts. I needed to be methodical, to plan every step carefully. The house was still empty when I walked in. Jessica had called and left a message saying she was staying with a friend for the night, giving me the space I needed. I was grateful for the solitude. It gave me time to think, to plan without distraction. I went to the study, closed the door, and booted up my laptop. My first step was to gather information. I needed to know everything about Daniel, his life, his routines, his vulnerabilities. I started with his social media profiles, combing through every post and every comment. His life seemed perfect on the surface. A successful career, a loving wife, Rachel, and a social circle that admired him. It made me sick. I took note of his workplace, his favorite hangout spots, and any other details that might be useful. I saved photos and screenshots, creating a dossier that painted a comprehensive picture of his life. As I dug deeper, I found myself becoming more and more determined. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice, about making him pay for the pain he had caused. Next, I turned my attention to Jessica's communications. I needed to understand the full extent of their relationship. I accessed her phone records, email, and messages. It was painful, reading the exchanges between them and seeing the affection and intimacy they shared. But it also fueled my resolve. Every message, every stolen moment, was another nail in the coffin of my old life. I spent hours poring over the information, piecing together a timeline of their affair. It was clear that Daniel was more than just a casual fling. He had become a significant part of Jessica's life. That realization hurt, but it also solidified my determination to see this through. The next day, I called in sick to work. I couldn't focus on anything else until I had a solid plan in place. I started by researching ways to expose Daniel's affair to his workplace. Anonymity was crucial. I couldn't afford to have this traced back to me. I found several whistleblower websites and forums where anonymous tips could be submitted. Perfect. I crafted a detailed message, complete with the photos and screenshots I had collected. I made sure to highlight the most damning pieces of evidence, framing Daniel as a deceitful and untrustworthy employee. I sent the message to his boss and several higher-ups in the company, ensuring it would cause maximum damage. Next, I turned my attention to Rachel. She deserved to know the truth about her husband, and I knew exactly how to deliver it. I created an anonymous email account and composed a heartfelt message, pretending to be a concerned friend. I attached the photos and messages, explaining that I couldn't stay silent any longer. I sent the email, knowing it would shatter her world as mine had been shattered. With those two steps in motion, I began planning the final phase of my revenge. I needed to confront Jessica again, but this time, I would be in control. I decided to wait for the fallout to begin before making my move. I wanted her to see the consequences of her actions, to feel the full weight of her betrayal. Days passed, each one feeling like an eternity. I monitored Daniel's workplace and social media, waiting for signs that my plan was working. It didn't take long. Rumors started circulating, and soon enough, I saw a post from one of Daniel's colleagues about an internal investigation. I smiled to myself, knowing that the wheels were in motion. Rachel's response came next. Her social media went silent, and mutual friends began posting messages of support and sympathy. I imagined the confrontation that must have taken place, the look of shock and betrayal on her face when she saw the evidence. It was a small comfort, but it was enough to keep me going. Finally, the day came when I was ready to confront Jessica again. I called her and asked her to come home, saying we needed to talk. She sounded hopeful, as if she believed there was still a chance to fix things. It made me sick, but I kept my voice steady. When she arrived, I was waiting for her in the living room. She looked nervous, her eyes red from crying. "John, thank you for giving me this chance," she said, her voice trembling. "Sit down," I said, my tone cold and authoritative. She sat, fidgeting nervously. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about what I did. I know I hurt you, and I'm so sorry. I want to make things right." I leaned forward, fixing her with a hard stare. "You can't make things right, Jessica. You destroyed our marriage, but you need to understand the consequences of your actions." She looked confused. "What do you mean?" I pulled out the dossier I had compiled and placed it on the table. "I've exposed your affair, Jessica. Daniel's life is falling apart as we speak. His career is in jeopardy and his wife knows everything." Her eyes widened in shock. "You did this?" "Yes," I said, my voice firm. I did this, and I'm filing for divorce. You'll be hearing from my lawyer soon. Tears streamed down her face, but I felt nothing. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with the consequences. I stood up, leaving her there sobbing, and walked out of the house. My revenge was complete, and it was time for me to move on. As I left the house, a mix of satisfaction and emptiness washed over me. The revenge against Daniel had been executed perfectly, and Jessica was now facing the ruins of her actions. But there was still one last confrontation I needed to have, a final conversation to bring closure to this episode of my life. I drove aimlessly for a while, collecting my thoughts. Confronting Jessica was going to be difficult, but it was necessary. I couldn't just walk away without making her understand the depth of her betrayal and the consequences it had wrought. I needed to hear her reasons, however painful, and to lay bare the truth of what she had done to us. Returning home, I found Jessica still sitting in the living room, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked up as I entered, her expression a mixture of fear and hope. "John, please," she began, her voice trembling. "I know I hurt you, but I want to make things right. I want to fix this." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I had to say. "Jessica, there's no fixing this. Our marriage is over, but I need to understand why. Why did you do it?" She looked down at her hands, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I don't know," she whispered. "I was lonely, and Daniel was there. He made me feel special, like I mattered." "Wasn't I enough?" I asked, my voice breaking. "We had everything, Jessica. A home, a life together. Why wasn't that enough for you?" "It wasn't about you," she said, looking up at me with desperate eyes. "It was about me. I felt lost, like I was just going through the motions. And then Daniel came along, and I felt alive again." Her words cut deep, but I forced myself to stay composed. "So, you threw away everything we had for a thrill? For a momentary escape?" "It wasn't just a thrill," she said, her voice growing firmer. "I thought I loved him. But now, seeing what it's done to us, I realize how wrong I was." "Love?" I scoffed. "You don't destroy someone you love. You don't betray them like this." "I know," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I know I made a terrible mistake, and I'm so sorry. But I still love you, John. Please give me a chance to make it right." I shook my head, the pain of her words settling like a heavy weight on my chest. "It's too late for that, Jessica. You made your choice, and now you have to live with the consequences. But we can work through this," she pleaded. "We can go to counseling, try to rebuild what we've lost." "No," I said firmly. "I can't live with the betrayal, Jessica. Every time I look at you, I see the lies, the deceit. I deserve better than that, and so do you." She broke down completely, her sobs echoing through the room. "I'm so sorry," she kept repeating, but her words no longer held any power over me. I stood there for a moment, watching her crumble, and felt a strange sense of detachment. This was the woman I had loved, the woman I had vowed to spend my life with. And now, she was just a stranger who had broken my heart. "I'll be staying with Mike for a while," I said finally, my voice cold and distant. "I'll have my lawyer contact you about the divorce proceedings." Jessica looked up, her face a mask of despair. "John, please." But I couldn't stay any longer. I turned and walked out of the house, leaving behind the life we had built together. As I drove to Mike's place, I felt a mix of relief and sorrow. The revenge was complete, but the pain of betrayal still lingered. When I arrived at Mike's, he greeted me with a hug, offering the support I desperately needed. "How are you holding up?" he asked, concern etched on his face. "I'm getting there," I said, managing a weak smile. "It's going to take time, but I'll be okay." We spent the evening talking, Mike offering words of encouragement and reassurance. He helped me see that moving on was possible, and that I could rebuild my life even after such a devastating blow. As I lay in the guest room that night, I thought about the future. It was uncertain, filled with challenges and unknowns. But one thing was clear. I wouldn't let Jessica's betrayal define me. I would rise from this, stronger and wiser, ready to face whatever came next. And as I drifted off to sleep, I felt a small spark of hope. The road ahead would be difficult, but it was a journey I was ready to undertake. I had faced the worst, and now it was time to start anew. The next morning, I woke up at Mike's place, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and determination. I knew that the most challenging part of my journey was just beginning, the divorce. It was time to make it official and put an end to the life I had shared with Jessica. Mike had already left for work, leaving a note on the kitchen counter offering support and reminding me to call if I needed anything. I appreciated his kindness, but I knew this was something I had to face on my own. I picked up my phone and dialed the number of a lawyer I had researched the previous night. "Good morning, this is John Thompson," I said when the receptionist answered. "I'd like to schedule an appointment with Mr. Harris regarding a divorce." After setting up the meeting for that afternoon, I spent the rest of the morning gathering all the necessary documents and information. I knew this process was going to be painful, but it was a step I needed to take to reclaim my life. When I arrived at the lawyer's office, I was greeted by a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor and a sympathetic smile. "Mr. Thompson, please come in," he said, gesturing toward his office. "How can I assist you today?" I took a seat and handed him the papers. "I want to file for divorce," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "My wife has been unfaithful, and there's no going back." Mr. Harris nodded. His expression was professional, yet compassionate. "I'm very sorry to hear that. Let's go over the details and make sure everything is in order." We spent the next hour discussing the specifics of my marriage, our assets, and the evidence of Jessica's infidelity. I provided him with the photos and messages I had collected, and he assured me that we had a strong case. As we wrapped up, he handed me a set of documents to review and sign. "I'll file these with the court today," he said. "You'll be officially served with the divorce papers soon. In the meantime, if you have any questions or need support, don't hesitate to contact me." I thanked him and left the office, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. It was painful, but it also felt like I was taking control of my life again. The drive back to Mike's was filled with a mix of relief and sadness. I knew I had done the right thing, but the reality of ending my marriage was still sinking in. When I arrived back at Mike's, I called Jessica. She picked up after a few rings, her voice hesitant. "John, what is it?" "I just came back from the lawyer's office," I said, my tone firm but calm. "I've filed for divorce. You'll be served with the papers soon." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "I understand," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I knew this was coming, but it still hurts." "It hurts me too," I replied, my voice softening slightly. "But this is the only way forward. We need to move on." "I know," she said, and I could hear the tears in her voice. I don't know how to say goodbye." "We've already said our goodbyes, Jessica," I said, feeling a lump in my throat. "Now it's time to start over, for both of us." We ended the call, and I felt a strange sense of finality. The divorce papers were a tangible representation of the end, a line drawn between our past and the uncertain future. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the documents, and felt a mix of emotions: sadness for what was lost, but also a glimmer of hope for what might come. Over the next few days, I focused on the practical aspects of the divorce. I met with Mr. Harris regularly to discuss the proceedings, ensuring everything was moving forward smoothly. I also began the process of finding a new place to live, somewhere that could be a fresh start for me. Mike continued to be a supportive friend, offering his home and his ear whenever I needed it. We spent evenings talking about everything and nothing, and slowly I began to feel a sense of normalcy returning. One evening, as we were sitting on the porch, Mike looked at me and said, "You know, John, this could be an opportunity for you. A chance to rediscover yourself, to find out what makes you happy." I nodded, appreciating his optimism. "Yeah, maybe you're right. It's just hard to see that right now." "I get it," he said, patting me on the back. "But you'll get through this, and when you do, you'll be stronger for it." His words stayed with me, a beacon of hope in the midst of the turmoil. I knew the road ahead was long and uncertain, but with each step, I felt a little more confident, a little more ready to face whatever came next. The divorce papers were just the beginning of my journey. There was still a lot of healing to do, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving in the right direction. And that, I realized, was something worth holding on to. Days turned into weeks as the divorce proceedings continued. The initial shock and turmoil began to settle, replaced by a somber acceptance of my new reality. Mike had been a constant source of support, his home a sanctuary where I could slowly rebuild my shattered life. One evening, after a long day at work, Mike and I were sitting on the porch, enjoying a couple of beers. The summer air was warm and carried the faint scent of flowers from the garden. It was peaceful, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions that had consumed me over the past weeks. "How are you holding up, John?" Mike asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "I'm getting there," I replied, taking a sip of my beer. "It's been tough, but I'm starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel." Mike nodded, looking contemplative. "There's something I need to tell you, John. Something I've been keeping from you." I turned to him, sensing the gravity in his voice. "What is it, Mike?" He took a deep breath, his eyes meeting mine. "Remember when Jessica and I worked together on that project last year? The one where we had to travel to Chicago for a week?" I nodded, a sinking feeling in my stomach. "Yeah, I remember. What about it?" Mike looked away, his expression pained. "Something happened during that trip. Jessica and we got too close. We had a few drinks one night, and one thing led to another. We ended up spending the night together. The world seemed to tilt, and I felt a surge of anger and betrayal. "Are you saying you slept with my wife?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Yes," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, John. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. I regretted it the moment it happened, but I was too much of a coward to tell you." I stood up, feeling a mix of rage and hurt. "Why are you telling me this now, Mike? After everything that's happened, why now?" "Because you deserve to know the truth," he said, his eyes filled with remorse. "I couldn't keep lying to you, especially after seeing how much pain you've been through. You have every right to be angry with me, to hate me, but I needed to come clean." I stared at him, my mind reeling. Mike, my best friend, the person who had been my rock during this entire ordeal, had betrayed me too. The irony was almost too much to bear. "I trusted you," I said, my voice shaking. "I trusted both of you." "I know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And I betrayed that trust. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know the truth." I turned away, unable to look at him any longer. The betrayal felt like a fresh wound, reopening the pain I had tried so hard to heal from. "I need some time, Mike. I need to think." He nodded, his expression filled with sorrow. "Take all the time you need, John. I'll give you your space." I walked inside my thoughts, a whirlwind of anger, hurt, and confusion. The one person I thought I could rely on had turned out to be just as deceitful as Jessica. I felt like I was drowning, the weight of the betrayals pulling me under. I spent the night pacing the guest room, unable to sleep. Memories of the past, of the friendship I had cherished, now felt tainted. I didn't know if I could ever look at Mike the same way again, or if our friendship could survive this revelation. The next morning, I decided I needed to leave. I couldn't stay in a place that now felt so suffocating, so filled with lies. I packed my things and left a note for Mike, thanking him for his support, but explaining that I needed to find my own way now. I found a small apartment on the other side of town, a modest place that offered the anonymity and solitude I craved. Moving in was a cathartic experience, a physical representation of my desire to start over. Over the next few days, I focused on settling into my new life. I threw myself into work, trying to keep my mind occupied and away from the constant replay of betrayals. It wasn't easy, but slowly, I began to find a new rhythm, a new normal. One evening, as I was unpacking the last of my boxes, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated before answering. "Hello? John, it's Rachel, Daniel's wife," the voice on the other end said. I was taken aback. "Rachel, how did you get my number?" "Jessica gave it to me," she said. "I hope you don't mind me calling. I needed someone to talk to, someone who understands what I'm going through." "Of course," I said, my curiosity piqued. "What can I do for you?" "I know this might sound strange," she began, "but would you be willing to meet up? There's something I need to discuss with you, something important." I agreed, setting up a meeting for the next day. As I hung up the phone, I felt a sense of anticipation. Rachel's call was unexpected, but perhaps it held the key to the next episode of my journey. The following day, I met Rachel at a quiet cafe downtown. She looked as tired and worn out as I felt, the toll of the recent events evident in her eyes. We exchanged pleasantries before getting to the heart of the matter. "John, I wanted to talk to you about Jessica and Daniel," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've discovered something that I think you need to know." "What is it?" I asked, leaning forward, my interest piqued. Rachel took a deep breath before speaking. Jessica and Daniel's affair wasn't just a fling. They were planning to leave us, to start a new life together. I found messages between them, plans for the future. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a calculated betrayal. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. The betrayal ran even deeper than I had imagined. But as I looked at Rachel, I realized that I wasn't alone in this. We had both been victims of cruel deceit, and perhaps together, we could find a way to move forward. "Thank you for telling me, Rachel," I said, feeling a newfound sense of resolve. "We need to stick together, to support each other through this." She nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "Agreed. We've both been through enough. It's time to take control of our lives again." As we talked, I felt a sense of camaraderie and understanding. Rachel's revelation had added a new layer to the betrayal, but it also gave me a sense of purpose. We would navigate this storm together, and in doing so, find a way to heal and rebuild our lives. Meeting with Rachel was a turning point. Her revelation about Jessica and Daniel's long-term plans gave me the clarity I needed. The betrayals were far more calculated than I had imagined, and it fueled a burning desire for justice. I knew I couldn't move on without making sure they faced the consequences of their actions. After our meeting, Rachel and I decided to work together. She had already gathered a significant amount of evidence, emails, text messages, and financial records, proving the extent of Jessica and Daniel's affair and their plans to run away together. We spent hours going through everything, piecing together the timeline and understanding just how deep the deception ran. "Look at this," Rachel said, showing me an email from Jessica to Daniel. "They were planning to leave next month. They even discussed taking money from our joint accounts." I felt a surge of anger but kept my composure. "We need to expose this. They can't get away with it." Rachel nodded. "But how? We can't just confront them. They might deny everything or destroy the evidence." "We need a plan," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Something that will force them to face the consequences publicly." After much discussion, we decided on a course of action. Rachel had access to Daniel's office, and we planned to use that to our advantage. We would gather all the evidence and present it in a way that couldn't be ignored. Our goal was to ensure their reputations and plans were ruined, just as they had tried to ruin our lives. The first step was to copy all the incriminating emails and messages onto a USB drive. Rachel handled this part, ensuring she left no trace. Meanwhile, I focused on collecting financial records and other documents that proved their intent to steal from us. A week later, we were ready. Rachel had secured access to a high-level meeting at Daniel's firm, where he was set to present a major project. It was the perfect opportunity to reveal everything. We planned to anonymously send the evidence to key members of his team and the board of directors just before the meeting started. The day of the meeting, Rachel and I were both on edge but determined. We met in a cafe near Daniel's office to finalize our plan and ensure everything was in place. "Are you ready for this?" Rachel asked, her eyes filled with a mix of nerves and determination. "Yes," I said firmly. "Let's do it." Rachel left for Daniel's office and I stayed behind, ready to send the emails at the agreed time. The minutes felt like hours, but finally, the moment came. I clicked send, and the evidence was on its way to everyone involved. Rachel had managed to secure a spot in the meeting room, pretending to be there for another reason. She described the scene to me later, how the atmosphere shifted dramatically as people started receiving the emails, their expressions changing from confusion to shock and anger. Daniel's presentation was abruptly interrupted by questions and accusations. The evidence was undeniable, and he had no way to refute it. His plans, both personal and professional, began to unravel right there in front of everyone. As for Jessica, I had arranged for a similar reveal. I sent the evidence to her boss and colleagues at her firm, ensuring they saw the full extent of her deceit. Her reaction, Rachel later told me, was one of complete devastation. The perfect image she had tried to maintain crumbled as the truth came to light. Later that evening, Rachel and I met again, both feeling a strange sense of relief. The battle was far from over, but we had taken a significant step toward reclaiming our lives. "We did it," Rachel said, raising her glass in a toast. To new beginnings. To new beginnings, I echoed, clinking my glass with hers. We knew there were still challenges ahead: legal battles, the finalization of our divorces, and the emotional healing that would take time. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. We had faced the worst, and now we could start to rebuild, stronger and wiser. As I walked back to my apartment that night, I felt a sense of closure. The path ahead was still uncertain, but I knew I wasn't walking it alone. With Rachel's support and the knowledge that I had taken a stand against the betrayal, I felt ready to face whatever came next. The aftermath of our revelations was chaotic but cathartic. Jessica and Daniel's lives unraveled rapidly. They were both fired from their jobs, their reputations in tatters, and their plans for a future together shattered. The divorce proceedings, once a daunting task, became almost routine, as both Jessica and Daniel had little ground to stand on. Rachel and I supported each other through the legal battles, sharing resources and offering emotional strength. We grew closer, not out of romantic interest, but from a deep understanding of the pain we had both endured and the determination to reclaim our lives. One evening, a few months after the confrontation, Rachel and I sat in a small, cozy restaurant, reflecting on how much had changed. The air was crisp with the early signs of autumn, and the warm lights inside created a comforting atmosphere. "It's hard to believe how far we've come," Rachel said, her eyes shining with a mixture of relief and hope. "From the darkest days to where we are now, it feels almost surreal." "I know what you mean," I replied, smiling. "It was a nightmare, but we've managed to come out on the other side stronger." Our conversation drifted to lighter topics, and for the first time in a long while, I felt genuinely happy. The weight of betrayal and anger had lifted, replaced by a sense of peace and possibility. As we finished our meal, Rachel looked at me with a thoughtful expression. "John, what do you see for your future now? What do you want to do with this new beginning?" I took a moment to consider her question. The past few months had been about survival and closure, but now I realized it was time to think about what came next. "I've been thinking about that a lot," I admitted. "I want to travel, maybe take some time to rediscover myself. I used to love painting, and I think I want to get back into it, find a new passion, something that brings me joy." Rachel smiled. "That sounds wonderful. I think it's important to reconnect with what makes us happy. For me, it's always been writing. I stopped for a while, but I want to start again. Maybe even write about this experience, turn it into something meaningful." We talked for hours, sharing dreams and aspirations. It felt like we were both finally ready to embrace the future, no longer haunted by the past. As we left the restaurant and walked through the quiet streets, I felt a sense of contentment I hadn't known in a long time. The next day, I took the first step towards my new beginning. I enrolled in an art class and began setting up a small studio in my apartment. Painting became my therapy, a way to express emotions that words couldn't capture. Each stroke of the brush was a release, a step towards healing. Rachel and I remained close friends, supporting each other in our respective journeys. She started writing again, pouring her heart into stories that reflected her strength and resilience. Our friendship became a testament to the human spirit's ability to endure and thrive, even in the face of profound betrayal. Months turned into a year, and life began to feel normal again, though a new kind of normal. I found joy in my art, in simple pleasures, and in the connections I had rebuilt with family and friends. The pain of the past hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into a source of strength, a reminder of how far I had come. One sunny afternoon, as I was painting in my studio, my phone rang. It was Rachel. "John, I have exciting news," she exclaimed. "One of my stories is going to be published. I wanted you to be the first to know." "That's incredible, Rachel," I said, genuinely thrilled for her. "You deserve it. You've worked so hard." "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with joy. "I couldn't have done it without your support." We celebrated her success together, another milestone in our shared journey. It felt like a full-circle moment, a testament to our resilience and the power of new beginnings. As I stood in my studio surrounded by my paintings, I realized that life had a way of surprising you, of offering second chances, even when it seemed impossible. The betrayals of the past had been painful, but they had also led me to a place of profound self-discovery and growth. Looking at a finished painting, a vibrant landscape filled with light and color, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. I had turned my pain into art, my betrayal into strength. And as I picked up my brush to start a new canvas, I knew that this was only the beginning of a beautiful, unpredictable journey.